Hi, thank you so
Hello.
much for being here today. I'm really glad and excited that you were able to come and join me here in this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. Just to start us off, I was wondering if you could share a little bit about just all the things that you do, because we talked a little bit about it before, we started airing. And it seems like you wear a lot of hats. So for those that aren't aware of who you are, you mind sharing a bit about your work and what you do?
Yeah, so I do a couple of things. I am currently an assistant professor of English and creative writing at the University of Houston Clear Lake, which is, I want to say it's like down the street, but it's not down the street.
No, it's not.
I'm still new here, so
It's a bit of a drive.
yeah, it's quite a drive. I'm also a writer, so I write poetry. I write fiction and poetry mostly. And I'm also an editor. I edit at Pleiades, which comes out of the University of Central Missouri. And I like to eat macaroni and cheese and watch anime.
I love that. The macaroni and cheese anime I'm trying to get into, but I admire those that love it. I do.
Yeah.
So how do you balance it all?
It doesn't feel hard to me because I feel like I just kind of just how I structure my day. So I just wake up and then I work for a couple of hours and then, I take some breaks and then I work for a few more hours and then I go teach and then sometimes I'll do some working, sometimes I won't, sometimes then I'll just relax afterward.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like I was telling you before, I get bored easily. So I like to fill my day with things to do.
Right. That's very relatable. I definitely understand where you're coming from on that end. I feel like, it's one of those things where it's like you either get it or you don't.
Right.
A little bit about your work, I think, or from what I've seen so far in your work, I haven't read everything, but your focus usually is on identity. What has your journey through identity looked like?
Yeah. So that definitely comes up in all of my work. Even when I don't consciously try to kind of talk about it, it does come up. I grew up in a suburb of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, O'Hara Township. And I felt a little bit separated from a lot of my communities because during the week, I was at a white suburb all the time. And during the weekends, I'd hang out with my friends, my black friends on the hill, and we'd hang out and I'd be like, yes, one of my people, okay.
Right.
And then on the summers, I'd go to Puerto Rico, which is where my mother's family is from. And it was all very bifurcated and very just sort of fragmented in terms of where I belonged.
Right.
So that was something that I was always kind of struggling with. And then I think when I finally went to college and I kept moving around too, so that ended up changing everything too. So I had a kind of identity in flux, but I've come to kind of accept my Puerto Rican heritage. I mean, I've always really been proud of my Black heritage, but I think my Puerto Rican heritage was something that I came to accept probably in my teens. I think because in the very beginning, my mom had raised me to, you're Black. So you're Black and we're going to treat you as Black, so you're Black.
Right.
And she was like, my part of the culture, don't worry about those too much.
Right.
Because it's just going to be too confusing to people.
Right. And then they didn't want you to choose, so let's just stick with this one.
Yeah. So she was like, don't worry too much about that one. Your mother is Puerto Rican, just, And as I got older and I would just, I would realize that I would connect with other people that were Puerto Rican. We'd eat the same food or we grew up with learning Spanish. And I would be like, oh, there's a whole community, and I have my family in Connecticut and in Puerto Rico. So I felt I started to feel more comfortable claiming that part of my identity too, probably in my teens and then when I was going to college. And then the more I studied it, and I went to University of Puerto Rico for a little bit, so that ended up becoming more...
feel more grounded.
Yeah, grounded in that. Yeah, and then just coming to accept that was part of me too.
Yeah.
Because it was always part of me. But it was actually accepting that that's also part of my identity too. It was its own journey. But in terms of being a Black American, I've always felt pretty confident in that.
Yeah.
That's been the identity I've been kind of defaulting always to.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like, just like I was saying earlier, you're in a space where you kind of have to choose.
Right.
I definitely resonate with what you're saying. Like, I was Nigerian at home, and then I was Black American when I was outside.
Right.
My mom is an immigrant, so she doesn't really understand the fact that I'm Black American as well, too.
Right.
She's like, we're Nigerian. I'm like, yeah, and I'm also this thing. And I think for me, it was teens too, where I was like, okay, seeing other people who are Nigerian American and being able to see how they approach the culture, that kind of started that journey too.
Right.
It's tough though because of that separate feeling that you described.
Absolutely.
Right? Like having to be one version of yourself depending on the circle or the space that you're in.
Right. Yeah.
How
Yeah.
were you able to get to the point where you could connect all of them and feel like confident and be like, okay, yeah, I'm all of these things in every space?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a journey. I think where I am right now, I'm kind of just confident. I mean, of course I definitely struggle with insecurity all the time. But
That's real.
I'm just being real. But I'm confident in kind of who I am at this point.
Yeah.
And I think it's taken a journey. And it's taken living a lot of different places, being in a lot of different communities, meeting a lot of different people for me to kind of come to this place where I'm just like, I don't have to be somebody else. I don't have to act like anybody else. I can just be myself, you know, and that is all of these things and none of these things and all these things and all, et cetera. So, yeah.
I feel like identity is a lifelong journey
Oh,
in
yeah,
a
for
lot of different
sure.
ways.
For sure.
But I don't know if you know that, like when you're like, you know, growing up
Oh,
and like, you know,
no.
becoming an adult, you don't think like, oh, I'm going to have to keep like affirming myself in my identity all the
Absolutely.
time.
Absolutely.
And it's always going to be like in flux.
Yeah.
It's such a strange experience.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah. And so in being in a space where you accepted fully that you were Puerto Rican as well, how did that impact the ways that you wrote, right? And also what it's like to be an author and to be Black and Puerto Rican.
Yeah. So I think that one of the things, because I think when I first started writing, I would have Puerto Rican characters because I just was like, oh, I know this, you know, there were stories that were set in Connecticut and, you know, that have Puerto Rican characters. But I would bring that to the workshop and then people wouldn't understand what I was talking about, or they'd be like, huh? You know, so
like, what's confusing?
yeah, so it would have different reactions. And then if I use Spanish, they would be like, don't use Spanish.
Oh.
You know, that's not every, you know, I've had a lot of, you know, anyways, you hear all sorts of things. But I also wrote about, I think the biggest thing is I didn't want to write about people that were similar to me in any possible way when I first started writing.
Really?
Just as far away from me as physically
Why?
possible. I think I was just too afraid that people were going to think it was me.
And that's like a different level of visibility.
Yeah.
That you were like, maybe not.
Yeah, I think that in my first start of my fiction, I just did not want anyone to think it was me. So I was just like, my main characters were like elderly men from like...
So you just went completely
just totally
opposite.
like, yeah. And also that intrigued me too, because I didn't want to deal with myself, my writing at that point. But I think as I kept writing, my first book, Scar On Scar Off, was poetry, and there's a lot of different voices in that. There's not just the lyrical I, there's a lot of different voices. But I talked about a lot of kind of heavier topics. One of them was about sexual assault and all these things. And it was the first time I'd really opened up in my writing. But people responded to it and they said nice things to me. And then they kind of sent me emails. They were just like, oh, I've been through that too. And I was like, oh, so it's not, you know.
Just me.
Yeah. So it's actually not so bad to write about. It doesn't like, with fiction, I change everything. So none of it is real.
I mean, you can.
Yeah, absolutely. But I actually felt like some of the issues that I deal with personally, I could also kind of interweave in my fiction. So,
for sure.
Yeah, so that's something I kind of came to over time.
That's like my favorite thing about fiction. I think a lot of people, if you don't enjoy fiction, you're missing out on in a way.
Yeah.
But you can really see someone's experience, be like, oh, okay, this is also mine.
Yeah.
And this fictional person is going through the exact same thing and using language I've never been able to use for myself, but now I can because I've seen how they went through this experience.
Right. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Anyways, that's what I love about fiction. But so when did you decide to start writing a little bit more of you into your work?
So the first story in this collection is called Last Saints, and I wrote that in 2009. Oh, gosh, wow. So far long ago in undergrad. With my professor, Gita Kothari, and she gave me a great prompt. She was like, retell a fairy tale. And I had just been in Louisiana, and I was just like, okay, I'm going to set my fairy tale in 1920s Louisiana. But then the main character is like an elderly man. But I introduced a female character who was very in power and very, self-possessed, but she was also vulnerable and hurt, all these things. And I was like, I really like writing that. I really like writing this character who's very sort of multifaceted and who's, I just love it. So then I started writing more characters that were, just more women characters, just there's a lot of different, like, I don't know, I still play around with a lot of different characters and
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
different voices, but I started interweaving more issues of identity and culture and things into my work probably after that story.
Yeah, yeah. Do you feel like you were able to work out maybe some identity struggles in your writing in that way of like maybe things that you were dealing with or had dealt with in the past, and in writing it maybe brought up some fresh things for you or a new perspective that you didn't have before?
Um, yeah, I think that one of the things, there's a story in the collection called When Trying to Return Home, and it's the shortest piece, and it's the only one. I mean, I think I deal with identity in all the stories in some way, but I think it's the only one that deals directly with Black and Puerto Rican identity and not knowing where you fit in.
Mm.
But also because of that, it's because it's instigated by a death. So the main character's mother dies, and then she realizes that the person who represented the culture to her is no longer there.
Oh
Yeah, so then she has to kind of, reckon with, what do I do with this?
yeah.
And then she meets another woman who looks like her mother, and she projects onto her.
Mm.
So that's what that story is about. But I think that I had been thinking a lot about, my family, and, my grandmother just died a couple of years ago. And
I'm sorry to hear that.
yeah, it was rough, but and I think about my mother and all of this. I'm just like, okay, so who is gonna carry on all of this?
Yeah,
So
tough question.
yeah, so I think that that is also something that I was wrestling with in
Mm.
in that story.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up actually, because I think it's something that isn't talked about enough of
Right,
like, you know, ancestors and like generational people that we kind of rely on to carry recipes and language
right,
and, to teach us cultural things that we might not have full access to as
right.
they pass. Like, what are we supposed to, like, what does that gap look like? What are we
Exactly,
supposed to do?
exactly.
So what does that mean for you at this stage, right? Of like acknowledging like, okay, it might be up to you to pass on certain things. Did it kind of create a space of curiosity for you?
Oh yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. I mean, I want to invest more in my mother's culture, my father's line too, because my father's family is from all over the South and the Midwest.
Mm.
And I'm really interested in their stories as well. So that's actually a project I'm going to work on with kind of an ancestry project.
Okay.
And that's given me a lot of insight into my own family and things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I feel like generationally, right? Older generations feel like, oh, like, why do you want to see all these pictures and why do
right.
you want to know all these stories? And
Yeah.
it almost seems like a bother to them, but they
Yes.
don't realize that it's our way of being able to add layers to who we are as people.
Right.
Mm.
Absolutely. Yeah. My mom was, I was talking to my mom about this, and she was like, "You're writing about a lot about Puerto Rico," and I was like, "Yeah, I am, but not
Mm.
necessarily just the island, but just the experience and diasporic
Yeah,
experience and things like
right.
that." And she was like, "When I grew up, they used to call me Puerto Rican pig. They
Oh,
used to
wow.
say all these slurs to me. They made it so difficult to be Puerto Rican." And she
Mm.
was like, "But I'm really happy that you're kind of giving our culture light and you're bringing it out and all these things."
Yeah,
And that actually like was really eye opening to me because I wasn't thinking about that so much.
right, right.
So and I'm happy that meant something to her.
For sure. I mean, I can imagine it being maybe healing for her as well, too,
Right.
to see how you are talking about the beautiful parts of what it's like to be Puerto Rican and the diaspora in general, right? And things that maybe mean something to her, too, and knowing that people are also accepting of it and are
Yeah.
curious and are
Yeah.
celebrating with you in a time where she didn't have that.
Yeah.
That
Exactly.
is so beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, like her experience is the case for so many people.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you ever feel like it's difficult to be in the like writer publishing world and to also highlight these stories as well too?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that I'm very aware. Like, my stuff, like my scholarly field and my creative writing has been often called niche, or just it's like in its own little mini genre, and only a few
Hmm.
people read it. So
Which
that's
is
a
kind of rude, I
yeah,
think, a
yeah.
little.
It's a struggle to, and Anna wrote a short story collection, so it puts you even in this more kind of like,
But that
but
doesn't mean that it's any less significant,
I
right?
absolutely. I'm really proud of. I mean, I really love short stories, so I
Hmm.
would just continue to write
Me
those.
too,
Um,
personally. Especially if I'm struggling to maybe connect with something, I always turn to
yeah.
short
Oh yeah,
stories.
me too. And I love poetry as well.
Hmm.
But yeah, what was the question again? I was, your
I was
questions are
saying,
so great that I'm just like
no, that's
thinking.
okay.
Yeah.
I was saying, how has it been, or has it been difficult for you to talk about your side, or your Puerto Rican stories in the publishing world? Like, has there been pushback? How have you pushed past that? How important is representation in this space as well too.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I added that second part.
oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, so I've had negative comments, but I've also been really happy by the sort of positivity that I've received that I didn't expect. Because first of all, I thought this book was going to get rejected by everyone. Because I was like, who will read this? But it was really nice that the reception that I've gotten, so there has been negativity, there's been pushback, there's been kind of like why you're writing a short story collection, but at the same time, there's been a lot of positivity and a lot of love, and more so than I ever thought there would be. And I think people connect. People are just like, oh, that happened to me too. I'm like, really? I'm not the only one. Yeah. So it's a great feeling. So.
Yeah. But you mentioned that you didn't think it would have such a positive reaction. Why?
I don't know. I never. I always expect the worst.
Oh, that's fair.
I'm just like, if it doesn't work out, then I won't be disappointed. Yeah. So, yeah, but also, I mean, I think we definitely need more representation. I think a lot of people just don't know that Afro-Latina community even exists, and, this is why I teach those classes at my school. This is why I talk about it. This is why I decided that I wanted to write more characters who are Black Puerto Rican women, because, when I was growing up and I go to the bookstore, I would never find any books with Black Puerto Rican women. Now in this beautiful Kindred, you can find so many stories with so many different cultures represented. But I didn't have that experience. So I thought, well, if I ever write a book, then I want to have that experience represented. So if someone's looking for it, they'll be able to find it.
Yeah. And I think that means so much to so many people. I'm a strong believer that if you don't see yourself in a specific space or field, it doesn't feel like a possibility at all. I mean, even what I do is being a therapist for a long time, it didn't even seem like a career choice for me because I had no representation at the time.
Yeah,
I mean, there is so much more now, right?
Absolutely.
So it's like, okay, this field is a little bit more open to people that look like me. And the same thing for books as well, too, right?
Yeah.
The feeling of seeing yourself in a character in a book is indescribable.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How does it feel to know that you're able to provide that for people?
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge deal. I think that, because I stayed off social media for like 3 years because it was like affecting my mental health, and I got back on. Yes. And I got back on for my book. But then people started to send me messages on Instagram, and they were saying these really beautiful things. And I would cry, and I would be like, because you never think that anyone's going to really connect. I mean, I never thought anyone was going to really connect with my work. I thought it was just going to go into these.
I feel like that's like a very like an artist thing to say. It's like, I made this thing. Like, it's fine.
Yeah. It's just... it's out there, but I cared about everything I wrote about, and it came from my heart. So that's why I thought, no matter how this book does, this came from my heart. I did what I wanted to do, so I owned it.
Yeah. So speaking of social media and mental health, you said that you made that decision to get back on with the book, which I mean, it kind of seems like almost like a requirement now as an author to have some sort of like social media presence. How did you manage through any of the not so great feedback or things that people were telling you or messaging you about or commenting?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, we're real people. So when we get those messages, or you tag us in that stuff, or you say something, like, it hurts. Like, it's not like we're just like, nah. But I mean, I think that I've developed a little bit of a callus to it now, where it's just kind of like, it's not for everybody. Right. And that's pretty much it. So I think that when it first happened, I was just like, oh, this is so sad. But then after a while, I was just like, that's fine. Yeah. People, and also I think that I really honor the reader's experience. And I think that's the most important thing when you kind of give your book out to the world. It's no longer mine. I don't own it anymore. So they have the right to have whatever experience they have with my book. And, and I completely honor that.
I can imagine that mentality being a little bit freeing, right? And it's like, oh, I can't really like white knuckle this anymore. Like, it's like gone. There's nothing I can do to change it. And like you said, as long as you feel good about it and that you did what you sought out to do, that's all that matters to you.
Yeah.
But I guess it's speaking more so just about identity and how it shows up in most of the things that you do. I think a lot of people don't realize that the biggest impact on identity is our mental health, right? As we're trying to figure out where we fit in the world and find ways of being accepted, what ends up really suffering is our mental health. Did you ever experience anything like that on your journey to where you are right now, or even today?
Absolutely. And this is probably the first time I'll ever say this in any interview, but I struggled with, and my next book is kind of dealing with mental health issues. But when I was in high school, I struggled with anorexia, and that definitely affected my mental health. I got over that. When I was older, I have chronic OCD and PTSD, and I've dealt with other things as well.
Yeah.
So, those things definitely affect me. But I also I don't see them as just as negatives. They're just part of who I am. So I just see the world a little bit differently, and I react to
Yeah.
things a little bit differently. So that's definitely had an impact on that and identity too. And I think I'm coming to a place where because I used to want to hide all the mental health things that I was dealing with, and I was just like, okay, I'm fine. I'm always
Right,
fine.
right.
And now I'm coming to the point where I'm just like, it's part of me. It's part of my journey, and other people have gone through that too. So.
Yeah, wow. I mean, thank you so much for sharing just what your mental health journey has looked like up until this point. I think what you said resonates in many ways. Even if we live in a world now, there's like, oh, there's no stigma. It's totally fine to talk about. Not really, I think, at the same time, too. And when it comes to identity, it's like this, what people kind of often find is like, do I just kind of only identify as what I'm struggling with, or do I allow myself to be more than that?
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And it sounds like you're at the space where you're in a full acceptance of all the parts of you, including those as well, too.
Yeah, it's taken a long time to get there, but this is like the first time because I was struggling like yesterday, to be honest with you, and I was dealing with some stuff, and I was just like, oh my goodness, I am not in the space to just like, I just need to like a mental break.
Yeah.
So that happens sometimes, but and I started going off into my own trail. What was the other thing you were saying?
I don't even remember, but I have something to say with what you said.
Yeah.
I was going to say that, like, people don't understand that, like, healing is not a one-stop shop. It's not linear, and, like, you can be fully accepting of all you are and all the things that come with who you are as a person, then have a day where you're like, wow, it is really tough to be in my skin today, or it's really tough to be in my head today, or to be in this body.
Right.
Do you have anything that you do, or any sort of care practices that you try to incorporate on those days where you're like, I simply can't?
Yeah. And like I was saying, like that happens all the time. I love listening to music. I love writing music. I love.
Oh, I didn't know you write music.
Yeah,
too. Poetry.
I do. I'm not like good at it. Knowing these songs will never see the light of day.
I mean, there's freedom there too. We're like, this is for me.
No, exactly. So I feel like there's some stuff that I'll put out, but then some other stuff, like I have hundreds of songs that are just for me that I just write, and
you're a writer for sure.
That I just like to listen to them. But it's like therapy for me. So writing is also therapy for me.
Okay.
I think writing, because I have 3 degrees in creative writing, so I've been in workshops for like a long time. So you get used to, people, talking about your work and having different opinions about it and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I guess now I'm again.
No, that's okay. You said writing it seems like writing is the main thing that you focus on those days.
Yeah, so it's a form of therapy too.
So do you separate your writing at all, like writing for yourself and then writing for work, or did you find that it maybe blends sometimes?
I do have my writing for myself, so that's like my big like storage of songs and all this stuff like that. And I think that that's what I was going to say before, and then my thought flew away. That I have my writing for workshop, and I have my fiction that I want to publish, and then I have the poetry that I'm fine putting out there, even if it's personal. I'm just once I kind of decide that I want to put it out there, I kind of release it emotionally. So I'm just like, this is the readers; they can do whatever they want to it. But my songs that I listen to in my room, those are mine. Yeah. So
I believe that we all should have something that's for us. I feel like we live in a world where it's like you have to share everything,
right?
And we're really desperate to connect by any means necessary, and we're just kind of like neglecting that we should also have something for ourselves too.
Right.
For sure. In talking about just struggling with mental health since high school, something that I was wondering was, did you feel like there was stigma that maybe was surrounding you around the time, identifying as a Black and Puerto Rican woman, right? I think, when we talk about mental health, it's tough to put those two in the same sentence. So I'm wondering if that was your experience at all.
Yeah, so I grew up where I grew up in that white suburb, it was, I mean, I'm just be real, it was racist. It was very racist ever since
Oh,
I
in
was a little
Pennsylvania, right?
kid. Yeah, it was super, super racist. And I'm sorry to anyone who was there who knew me, but it was. Sorry. Like,
I mean, it's the truth.
yeah,
So
I mean, when I was a kid, a little girl said that I don't want to touch your Polly Pockets because I'm afraid the black will get on me and then I'll turn black. And then they said
like
I was,
Polly Pockets.
yeah, and I was just like, I was just trying to share my Polly Pocket with you. This is,
Like,
and then I was called names and I was shoved in lockers and all these things. So that definitely affected my mental health. So, but I still, like, my father, he was the first black person to ever segregate a black child to segregated school in St. Louis. So he walked in there and they were really cruel to him. So I think that growing up, those stories of strength and overcoming and dealing with racism and all that our ancestors went through kind of gave me strength.
yeah.
So that's what kind of got me through. And my parents' support. I had a very supportive family.
Oh, good.
Yeah, they were very supportive and they gave me the love and care that I needed at home that I may not have gotten out when I was out in the world.
Yeah. I mean, it's so important to have a safe space to land, especially because we live in a world that is so cruel.
Right.
Whether it's outwardly cruel or, microaggressions and all of the different things that we as brown and black people have to experience on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
Do you feel like when it comes to the ways that you talk about your mental health with your family or your friends, like, did you feel like you've had to unlearn anything that maybe you just felt as you were growing up or experienced?
Yeah. I think that I was raised to think, black people don't have mental health problems. They're strong. I had an elder that told me, he's like, you have slave blood, so
Wow.
you're powerful. You can get through anything.
That
And
is an aggressive
it
statement.
very
Like,
much is. And then like there's this strong black woman stereotype, and they expect us to do everything and be everything and be just, these super women who don't feel anything.
Yeah.
And I think that having that just took a toll on me.
Yeah.
But also I think that, that's what I try to talk about in my writing a lot. And that's why I really care about having characters that are very flawed, complete, just frustrated, searching. They don't have it all together.
Yeah.
Because I just feel like, sometimes you're not always
And
down there
that's okay.
being this
Right.
superwoman. Sometimes you're just trying to figure it out.
Right. And you're still deserving of being here, even if you're not like, this super strong black woman that's taking over the world. Right. So in many ways, it seems like you are approaching and prioritizing softness in a lot of different ways.
I think so too. I think that, black joy and softness, I think, is something that I'm moving into really caring about. What brings me joy, what brings my community joy, what brings me, but at the same time, I believe in the sacredness of the human being. And I think that if there's something that's unjust that's happening, we have to do something about it. Yeah. So, I also believe that as well. But I think that softness and dealing with people with radical love, I think, is really important.
Yeah. What does softness and joy look like for you in this phase of your life?
Yeah. So it's kind of spending time with people that I really care about, my friends and family. It's reading, it's listening to music, it's listening to jazz, it's going to a good live show. It's just things that bring me joy and happiness. Being in community, all those things, I think those bring me a lot of joy.
Yeah, and it's so important to be able to pinpoint them so quickly. I'm glad that you did that, because I feel like sometimes if we aren't aware of those things and we're in those moments where we really need to access like joy and like what we need, if we can't identify it, it becomes really difficult to try to push past whatever we're experiencing in that moment.
Right.
Would you say writing also brings you joy?
Oh, absolutely. Writing gives me a lot of joy. I think that I think of it as a profession, so I have to like break out of that. Yeah, because I try to separate the writer self from the just me, because the writer self is still, it's part of me, but it's not my entire identity.
How do you separate it? Because I mean, like, I feel like since it's such a big part of who you are in every aspect of your life, how do you kind of like keep them separate in a way?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because, I remember I had a teacher that said, keep your name if you're a writer, because they're going to send the checks they need to send the checks to the right place. I forget what the thing was.
Okay.
Because if you have a student name, then it's gonna like mess up your ability to get paid. I don't remember what.
I mean, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember what. I'm probably butchering it, but that's what I remember saying. So I was like, okay, I'll just keep my real name. But what happens was and what I didn't really anticipate is when you become a writer, it's your name, it's you. So people come at you. It's just like
from everywhere.
I'm just like, because it's like if you have a business, it's just like Cornerstone LLC,
right?
And they're just like, there's you, and then there's the business. And I don't like to think of writing as a business either, but I know it is, and it's just, I don't know.
It's a thin line. Yeah.
But it is. But you're putting yourself out there, so it just. And I was a very quiet, very shy person, so I think coming out there and is new for me. Yeah.
Do you ever feel like it's tough to know how much to put out there versus how much to keep?
Yeah, that's a great. And these are all such amazing questions.
I'm glad you think so.
Yeah, they really are. They're really making me go deep. Yeah, I think that. So, and then I forgot what the question was. Okay,
I was saying. Oh, now I might have forgotten too. Let me think.
You got me so deep.
Do you struggle with how much to put out there versus what to keep to yourself in the efforts of wanting? I mean, you are so public, right? Your name is everywhere, and people can just like look you up, which I think in many ways feels like ooh.
Yeah.
So how do you know where the balance is of like what you're putting out there versus what you're keeping?
Yeah, I think that I try to choose if it has a purpose to me, then I'll put it out there. So if I want to talk about my identity, then it's because, I feel as if perhaps, that story may be underrepresented in this situation. So I'm going to write this. Or sometimes I'll just have a funny story that I think is really interesting and I'll just write that too. Yeah. So it can be a lot of different things. So, in mental health, like the next book I'm coming out with, I was really nervous about it. And I was just like, I loved writing it, but then I was like, oh, I'm about to tell everyone that I got mental health issues. But then I was like, you know what? I want that because I grew up with a stigma that Black folks don't have mental health issues, that we're super strong, that a Black girl could never get anorexia, or that if you're a Black girl, you have to be powerful. You can't have deal with it, or you can't talk about this. So you have to slave blood, and I think that I just wanted to kind of play around with those ideas and sometimes destigmatize some of those myths around the community. Yeah. So that's what I was like. So that had a purpose to me. So I was like, I'll do it if it feels like it's the right thing
purposeful,
to do. Right? Yeah.
I mean, I think you're also talking about so much of the unlearning that we were talking about earlier in regards to not only talking about your mental health, but writing about it, right, is one would consider to be very vulnerable.
Right.
However, in being able to acknowledge that someone will read it and be like, oh, this is also me, and I'm not the only one that has these experiences, and I'm still lovable.
Right.
I'm still, a whole person. I think is so special.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of identity is wanting to be seen, right? In a world that like refuses to see, I would say, us in regards to Black and brown people.
Right.
So to know that your book will be able to highlight some things that maybe we were told is not for us, or that we don't get, just like that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? It'll start that unlearning for so many other people too.
Right. Yeah. Beautiful.
Do you feel like you learned anything about yourself in writing this new book? Anything new?
Yeah, so when Trying to Turn Home was a journey that took about 10 years to finally come together, because I was working on it on the side while I was working on a historical novel that I ended up not doing anything with. But I was working on these stories on the side. So, yeah.
I mean, I guess in regards to the book that's coming out this May, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you feel like you learned anything about yourself?
Oh, from that one? Yes. Yeah, so I think that I learned I learned it's okay to be vulnerable, and I think that some of those poems are very painful to write, but I just felt compelled to write them, and I was just like, I don't know if I should share this, but I was like, this is my experience, and I think it's also, I've been in a period of my life right now where I'm kind of just analyzing things, and I think that I went really hard through my college years, through my MFA, through my PhD, even the first couple of years of working. I just was working. I didn't have stop to just who are you? What are you doing?
Like sit,
Yeah,
yeah.
and be like, what did you learn from this? Like, what's going on here? So I think I was just rushing so fast, and I think now at this period, I'm just like, okay, I just
like feeling all the things.
yeah, and
Yeah,
still trying to just and being like, it's okay to figure yourself out, but
for
I also feel
sure.
more confident in just identity stuff than I used to
Yeah,
be.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's so real about just kind of like stacking your plate and pushing forward. Especially, I mean, the world that we live in encourages it, right? It's like, yeah,
yeah,
do as many degrees as you can and continue working and working and working. That
right,
I think identity takes a lot of stillness
right,
and it takes a lot of confrontation, things that
right,
maybe are not so pretty,
right,
and space to accept as well too.
right.
So I'm wondering if there's anyone, that might be listening that is struggling with their journey through identity or feeling safe and grounded in their identity. What's something that you would share with them from your perspective?
You know, as a person who, and this is me being real and being really open, as a person who's struggled with, should I even be alive or not? Keep going. It's really as simple as that.
Yeah.
There are people that love you. There are people that care about you. You do have something to offer the world. You have a purpose. You have gifts and talents that we really need to see. So keep going. We need you.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. And it's like, it's such a simple sentence, right? But it holds so much.
Right.
Because no one is really telling you that on a day-to-day basis to keep going. It's like you're forced to tell yourself that, but
right.
if you don't have the strength or the power to do so, how can you?
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think that we all have something to offer the world. Like we all have these different things that we're good at and different ways to serve others, and that we need each other too. So
that feels like that radical love that you were talking about
right.
earlier.
Yeah,
we definitely need more of that in the world that we live in, for sure.
Right.
And a question that I always ask folks that come is, what would little Jennifer think of your life today?
I think she would be surprised that it worked out.
That's so real.
That's She'd be real. Like, wait a minute, so it actually did work out?
Like you're okay. Like you're doing lots of things.
Yeah, just like you're actually okay. Everything's going all right. Yeah. So I think I would be happy that I'm in a good place right now.
Yeah, I love to hear that. And I mean, to add to maybe what she would think too, I mean, you've been able to accept so many things and also work towards feeling more grounded in yourself, in your body, in your mind. And I think that that's beautiful too.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Thank you so much for coming
today.
Yeah,
thank you for this. This was amazing.
Yes, I feel like a lot of people will identify with the identity conversations that we've had and will hopefully feel encouraged to keep going. So thank you so much.
Thank you.